All right. Welcome. Jason Murphy, Rebel Dharma, Wednesday night. Thanks for showing up. Those of you online and those of you in the room, nice to see you all. So we're gonna primarily meditate, but I guess I just want to ask, is there anyone new to the group, or anyone that wants to introduce themselves in the room or on the Zoom? No, mostly familiar faces, people that I've seen before. Yeah. Well, I've been working a little bit through a series, and it might have felt, if you were here last week, it might have felt like I took a little bit of a detour. Last week, we kind of got into this conversation about altruism and altruistic joy. And yeah, just kind of like, what does altruism mean? Is Buddhism an altruistic philosophy? We pretty much settled on yes, and then talked about ways to cultivate, more joy in our lives, contentment, happiness. And the week before, I was talking about the second noble truth, which is the cause of suffering. And so I felt like, what is the proximate, first of all, what's the proximate cause of suffering? Well, selfish and self-centered craving. And so then I flipped that next week, just because I felt like it, to talk about altruism. So what's the opposite of selfish and self-centered craving, but really altruistic joy, right? And so that's kind of why I felt like that was a good place to just kind of fit it in. And I'm trying to do a little bit more of talking about the different aspects of both wisdom practice and heart practice, and kind of bring them in. So I'm not just doing one list and then doing another list, but actually talking about how they integrate. So like how wisdom informs heart practice and liberation, and how heart practice informs the development of wisdom, right? So instead of them seeming to be separate, because see, for some people, there's two ways that our minds generally go or work, right? One is linear, like this, then that, then this, then that, then this. And then the other is systemic, which is this is connected to that, which then is connected to this, which then is connected to that. And just using these two kind of frames of linear versus systemic, generally Buddhism is taught in a linear fashion. But the language that Buddhism was first written down in, the language that it was spoken in, and the general philosophy of Buddhism is not linear at all. It's totally systemic, seeing the interdependence or the interrelation of things and ourselves and the world. This is a systemic idea. Western minds tend to have have had a linear trajectory. A lot of that is because of language and because of the way in which our educational system is set up, which is structural, hierarchical, linear. Where other languages, basically, kind of East Asian, Southern hemispheric, romantic languages are all generally systemic in their communication. Spanish versus English, as an example. French versus German, as an example, right? So just to kind of put that out there. That was a bit of a tangent, but I was waiting for people to kind of come in. And so today I'm going to come back to the third noble truth. I'll do an overview of the four noble truths, and then we'll kind of focus a little bit on the third noble truth, which I think gets skipped over a lot. And we'll see what happens after that. All right. Good to see you all. Okay. Let's settle in. So finding a posture that's workable, that's sustainable, one where you can feel relaxed and alert. Yeah, feel free to come feel the cushions, use the chair. Great. And as you feel ready, making any kind of subtle adjustments to your posture, allowing your eyes to close if that feels comfortable to you. If you don't wish to close your eyes, or that's not something that feels comfortable to you, you can just allow your eyes to be downcast, just focusing a little bit ahead of you, maybe to the floor, to the ground, even a spot on the wall. The main point is to reduce the intake of kind of subject matter through the eyes. What most people notice is almost immediately the ears or the hearing begins to increase or becomes more noticeable. Just opening to the comings and goings of sound. Sounds outside the room. Sounds inside the room. And just as we're reducing the emphasis on seeing, we're also reducing the emphasis on hearing. So allowing sounds to be in the background of our attention. And then the invitation is to really allow the attention to inhabit the body. The sensations present here in this body. Maybe even scanning through head to feet, feet to head. Just noticing what's happening here in this body right now. Is there tension? Is there tightness? Is there tingling? Cold or warmth? Holding, release, space. And then further Turning the attention to the breath, this experience of breathing in the body. And where can you most easily come into contact with that experience of breathing? Taking a few deeper breaths, just really feeling the breath in the body. The rise and fall, the expansion and contraction. And trying to find a point where it's most easily able to connect. Use that as an anchor or a place to return to again and again. Recognizing that the mind is still thinking. And again, just like the other senses, we're inviting the thinking mind to be in the background of our attention as we allow the sensation of breath and body to take the foreground. The mind is just another sense. Thinking is just another process, like hearing, like sensations of the body, like taste, like touch, like smell, like seeing, just another sense. Breathing in, know that you're breathing in. Breathing out, know that you're breathing out. The invitation in this practice is whenever we recognize that the attention has wandered off, particularly into thinking or planning, whether it's past or future, remember, regret, just to relax and release. Release the thinking, allowing it to move back into the background of our attention without judgment or criticism. It's just thinking, no big deal. Re-establishing mindfulness of breathing. again and again, recognizing when the attention wanders off, and with that sense of friendliness or kindness with the mind, aiming the attention back. Relax into the breath. Release the thinking mind, the need to know or figure out. Settling back into the body, the experience of breathing in this body, establishing and re-establishing mindfulness of breathing. again and again. Relax, release each breath, each moment. Noticing perhaps where your mind is at and what is your relationship to this moment. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Right. 30 minutes of meditation. It's about the way it goes. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. It's important to not evaluate your meditations as good or bad. You know, I mean, if you needed to evaluate, which we do because it's just part of our makeup, and there's like the term that the Buddha used is called mana, and mana basically means conceit. Like we're so conceited that we have to evaluate or compare constantly with each other, with the world, with our insides versus our outsides. There's this constant comparison. And, you know, the Buddha points to that, you know, we can subside, you know, this maybe unskillful trait or mental kind of proliferation, but it takes some work. So when I use that kind of phrase, like, you know, when you recognize that the mind is thinking, you know, don't judge it. Don't worry about it. Just thinking and come back. Just judging and come back. Using the meditative object, the mindfulness object, right, just as a place to touch back into of neutrality, really. The breath is pretty neutral. Can be exciting. There can be some things happening in the breath, but it's just fairly, it's breathing. But my point about, you know, evaluating, oh, was that a good meditation or was that a bad meditation? You know, I mean, I think about, was it skillful? Was it helpful? Or was it not helpful? Did I learn something about my mind, about my body, about during that last 30 minutes? Was I spaced out the whole time? And just that kind of re-establishing again and again, this is the practice. It's not whether you got into some blissful states or your mind shut up completely. That's not the goal. It's not the goal. So with that, I guess I'll just open up for a minute or two for any questions specifically in regards to meditation or the instruction, meditation in general, and then I'll kind of go into the topic. Of course, you can write a question in the chat if you'd like, or you can raise your hand. Yeah.
You mentioned before the concept of jhanas and jhanic states, I guess. You know, as we practice mindfulness, it's, you know, mostly sort of like a Vipassana, you know, practice as I understand it. Is there any promise of like achieving a jhanic state through like a traditional Vipassana practice?
So the question was on what's called jhana, or deep absorption states that can be found or achieved through concentration, different levels of concentration practice. And is there a kind of correlation or connection? Like, can one achieve jhana through these deeper absorption states through Vipassana practice? It's a great question. I mean, I feel like they're two different things. And what I mean by that is jhana, or concentration, or what's called samadhi practice, is really focused on achieving jhana, right? And that means absorption, complete absorption into the meditation object. And so really I don't even remember how many levels of jhana there are. I've certainly not achieved them all. But I have felt very concentrated and very absorbed into a meditation object to the point where the meditation object disappears. And that's possible. That's part of jhana. The danger in jhana, I think jhana practice can be useful. Concentration practice can be useful. It's a good way to learn to focus the mind, right? And to learn to, kind of separate yourself from the busyness of our everyday life. The danger that the Buddha pointed out, and that I would point out, and most teachers in this tradition anyway would point out, is that that can be very addictive, right? Like literally avoidance of what's happening in the mind or in the emotional body, right? And it's very fucking enticing, particularly, I mean, I've never been super interested in like getting to all the jhana states. I can't remember if there's like 7 or 9 or something like that. Mainly because what the Buddha taught, or what he described, is like jhana states are cool, but really vipassana is liberating. Jhana states, or deep concentrated absorption states, can help us to kind of understand more of, what that experience is like, and can aid in the level of concentration that it takes in order to engage and continue to engage mindfully. So to answer your question, the question like, is it possible through vipassana to get into those jhana states? My understanding is not really yet. There is a form of concentration known as anapanasati, which I practiced. This is from Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, amazing wise teacher who died in the 80s, but was a teacher to many of the Western teachers in the Vipassana tradition. And he primarily taught anapanasati, which is mindfulness and wisdom of the in and out breath. And so this is really absorbing into the breath as the primary object and allowing those states to arise. But what happens is that we're still kind of aware of all of the different things that are happening in the mind and even in our environment. And so that can be something that can be useful to kind of do, have a both and. One of the ways that I heard it being described, this kind of balance between concentration and mindfulness, is that you need about as much concentration and mindfulness to gain insight as you need, like in meditation, as you need to ride a bicycle. Like riding a bicycle, you have to be focused. You can't just be spaced out. You have to know where you're going, right? You have to look ahead. And then you have to, keep balance, and you have to be aware of your surroundings, right? Otherwise, you're going to go off a cliff, or you're going to run into something. You're not going to see where you're going. Driving a car would be simpler, but I think there's more effort involved actually in riding a bicycle. Maybe skateboarding too, something like that. But riding a bicycle has the different elements of concentration and mindfulness and effort, right? Unless it's an e-bike, and then you're just cheating, right? That's like taking peyote and trying to get enlightened. You're just cheating. You're going to have some cool experiences, but you didn't really get anything from the effort. There was no effort involved. So that's about the way I think about it. Mm-hmm. Any other kind of just questions on Vipassana, meditation? Yeah.
I have been having kind of a weird thing happen. I meditate every night to be able to go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And having consistency with that is something that's new for me within the last few months, which is good, but I think to some extent, because my body is so used to like, okay, we're doing this to go to sleep now.
Mhm.
When I meditate and I'm not going to sleep, I end up getting to kind of a space of like, I'm not asleep, but I'm not necessarily
Mhm.
super aware, where I'm like kind of spacing out during my meditation, which at first I was like, oh, I'm doing it.
Mhm.
Like if my mind's blank, like I'm doing it. But it kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It doesn't feel like there's like intention behind it. I don't know how to explain it. Like I kind of
Mhm. Let me ask you,
doing it, and then I'll get to a space of where it's like somewhere in between.
like tonight, like during here, like here, during this meditation, you got kind of sleepy.
Yeah,
Like
well,
it's an automatic, like that happens. It's like
yeah, towards the end of it, like I had like a normal time, and then towards the end of it, I was kind of like blanking out, and then like you rang the bell, and I was like, oh, I'm meditating. Like I wasn't asleep, because
Right.
when I fall asleep when I'm meditating, I always like,
yeah,
moving, and then I'm like, oh, I'm
right.
asleep.
Okay.
Um,
Well, let me ask you a question. So, when you're meditating to go to sleep, quote unquote, what kind of meditation are you doing?
um, I usually just I put on like vagus nerve stimulating music.
And are you laying down?
Yeah.
Okay.
And like lay down, close my eyes, and just try and like, clear my mind.
Okay. So that's kind of different than sitting up and doing what we're doing here. But you're saying that you're noticing that there's like a habitual kind of response to kind of go to like a little bit lethargy, relaxation,
Yeah.
spaciness. Yeah, yeah. That's okay. Just notice that. And sit up during any other meditation besides kind of sleepy meditation. And meditation really, I mean, it's not a great thing to do to go to sleep, but it can be helpful in the sense that it relaxes the brain, right? It's relaxing from alpha waves to beta waves, which is kind of sleepy, spacey, to theta waves, which is then kind of insight, and then to delta waves, which is really like deep, concentrated insight, right? So, and in jhana, you're trying to get to delta waves, which is not necessarily it's not necessarily the kind of insight where we're like aware of what's happening. It's just like a deep level of relaxation. It feels kind of awesome. But so yeah, I would say that laying down and doing something different than what you do when you're kind of in like insight meditation practice, right? So I was going to say yoga nidra, right? Yoga nidra is deep relaxation practice. So just like a Google yoga nidra or look it up on YouTube. It's pretty helpful. I mean, Vegas, whatever, Vegas nerve relaxation. I don't know what those are. There's all kinds of different things now. ASMR, like there's different things that are going to help you kind of get into a theta state. That can be useful. Yeah, for sleep. But try yoga nidra. It's kind of cool. It's basically like a kind of a body scan with some, sitar and some kind of yogic music. So then when you're meditating this way, it's something kind of different. Your brain can kind of learn the difference.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm doing that, I'm usually like listening to, whatever the music is and kind of like focusing on that, like specifically sound, where usually, when I'm meditating for anything else, I'm focusing on like senses. What was that called again?
Yoga nidra. Shannon, is that what you wrote in the chat about the jhanas? Okay, yeah. So my research assistant looked up that there's 8 jhanas in Pali and 9 that are recognized in all of kind of Buddhism as far as like states of depth. Thank you. All right, so I want to kind of shift a little bit. We'll come back to questions in a bit, but I want to give there's some overview I've been talking about. Like, it's kind of cool, you can get into these like, oh, meditation, this like state and that state, and like what, there's there, and I dig it. I'm a total like meditation nerd when it comes to that. Like, I want to know about the kind of neuroscience connection, and I want to know about the, the megahertz of kind of brainwave activity that's happening. And I want to know about the nervous system, regulatory. These are all great benefits of meditation. And from a psychological, from a trauma focus or trauma informed psychological, orientation, super helpful to understand and to know. From a liberation perspective, it's just stuff, right, that we can kind of grab onto and nerd out on, which is not a bad thing. But from the Buddhist perspective, right, meditation is the one of the vehicles, and both concentration and mindfulness being part of the meditative, or what's often called bhavana. Bhavana means like meditative techniques. So the meditative techniques, the bhavana, is a vehicle, one of the ways in which we kind of focus into what the Buddhist primary teaching is, which is to find liberation from suffering, right? As found in the Four Noble Truths. And we've all heard the Four Noble Truths at least once. Right? There's suffering in this world. There is inherent suffering in this realm known as the human realm. That there is a cause to the suffering, right? This is craving, or what is often called tanha, craving. And then there is a third noble truth. So a few weeks ago, I talked about tanha. I talked about the second noble truth. And I was kind of saying, and that one of the things that we get tied up in or caught up in this craving is to be someone, to be somebody, or to feel nothing. That these are two of the extremes. The craving to be somebody, right? Like Brian and I were talking before the group about politicians and politics, and we're close to midterm elections, and and just the what's involved in that, like in the to like what drives someone to be a politician, or to be a CEO, or what drives someone to do that. There's a be somebody kind of attachment. And so there's that driving to be somebody, and then there's the opposite, which is to feel nothing, right? This numbing out, this avoidance. So one is a grasping and one is avoidance. And so this is ultimately second noble truth. So the third noble truth is cessation of suffering is possible. The complete end to suffering is possible in this life. I don't know if in this life is a direct kind of quote from the Buddha, but because there's a multi-life scheme within Buddhism, but definitely like, the alleviation of suffering. My translation is, I want to alleviate as much suffering as I possibly can in this life. And this is how. And the Buddha's teaching is that cessation of suffering is possible, to come to a complete end, nibbana, right? The extinguishing of the flame of suffering is possible. Third noble truth. Fourth noble truth, there's a practical, applicable way in which to meet the third noble truth. So another, which is, basically the Eightfold Path. So there's another way that one of my colleagues, his name is Pascal. He's from Quebec, and a great teacher, a wonderful teacher. I can't remember his last name right now, but he talked about the Four Noble Truths in this way. The first noble truth: there's something not quite right here. This kind of not quite right. Have you felt that? That's something not quite, like this dissatisfaction with the way things are, this discontent that kind of permeates. I think it permeates our society, and then people just react to it, right? So there's this, there's something not quite right here. This is, what the Buddha is describing as out of balance. Dukkha means out of round. Like there's like if a wheel is out of round, it's going to thud every time, every revolution. Thunk, thunk, thunk. That's kind of something not quite right here. Something in our world, not with you, not with me. It's not like there's something not quite right with us. There's something not quite right about the system of which we operate. That's important. That's an important distinction. Now, the second noble truth is why. Why is that? Well, we've already talked about craving. This kind of escape. And then there must be another way. This is the third noble truth from my friend Pascal. There must be another way. There's got to be something else that we can gravitate towards, that we can work on, besides just resignation to there's something not quite right here. Fuck it. That's the nihilistic view. The nihilistic view is this is fucked up. And if it's just that way, I'm just gonna not care. And just, we can just burn it out. And this is often a danger that people get into when they're kind of caught in the first and second noble truth, and they don't really understand the third noble truth, right? So the fourth noble truth is that there is a different way. We can do something different. This is what meditation is. This is what living the precepts are. This is, basically sila, samadhi, and panya. Right? Sila meaning ethical integrity, ethical living. Samadhi, this kind of balance, concentration, meditation, bhavana, right? Meditative techniques. And then panya, to uproot altogether. So sila is in place. This is part of right view, which is the eightfold path. Sila is in place as a form of right view. So right view is understanding the first three noble truths, and then recognizing that ethical integrity is really in place so that our suffering, the suffering that we experience, doesn't spill out on the rest of the world. That's actually its main goal. The main goal of ethical integrity is that I'm going to learn to contain my own fucking suffering instead of spewing it out into the world, which is what almost everyone does, right? I mean, not everyone, but almost. I'd say we'll go 60-40. 60% usually are kind of externally focused on, displacing their own discomfort. Now, the other maybe 40%, of course, I'm making these percentages up off the top of my head, but I believe the other 40% is, what do? They hold it in, right? And maybe even they actually take the suffering of other people and they internalize. So some externalize, some internalize. but mostly it's about avoidance in some way. So the sila, the ethical integrity, is about, can I stop doing that? Stop taking it in and stop spilling it out. And then samadhi, right? Concentration, mindfulness, meditation, is like, can I learn to be present with what's actually happening as it's happening? And then the panya, the wisdom, which is kind of the promise in Buddhism, is that we can uproot suffering altogether. Okay, so how does that happen? Well, right view, which leads to intention, which is part of speech and action and livelihood and effort and mindfulness and concentration, which then leads back to right view, because it's a loop. It's not a linear path. So this is a kind of broader view or way of looking at Four Noble Truths in the Eightfold Path. So now I'd like to break you guys up into some small groups. Let's go with twos. And it'd be good to just talk to someone that you don't really know. And I'm thinking to use as a prompt, Third Noble Truth. The cessation of suffering is possible. I want you to discuss that. Like, do you think that's true? Do you believe that? Do you believe that you will be able to alleviate suffering? That the alleviation of the complete uprooting of greed, hatred, and delusion is possible. Do you believe that? Let's just talk about it. Do you believe the Third Noble Truth as a possibility? Pretty easy to not deny suffering and craving, right? But the cessation of suffering, is that possible? The Buddha proposed that it is. All right, so let's break up into, and then, well, that's enough. That's enough. We'll just take let's do like 2 minutes. Put you guys in. So go ahead and team up. Just kind of talk to someone. Are we? All right. Yeah. So you guys will be a group of 3. And we're back. What do you think? You guys buying it? Sure. Sure. There's some guy at the farmer's market selling a tincture. Eradicate suffering today.
Can we lease it?
Would you buy it? What?
I said, can we lease it?
Can we lease it? Yeah, yeah. Is there a 30-day? Is there a lifetime?
Monthly subscription.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Exactly. Everything is on subscription, right? They want to keep you hooked now. So any other kind of, yeah, we gotta, sure, why not? Any other insightful thoughts come up to mind, for or against in the room or on Zoom? You guys can just unmute yourself. Go ahead, Mike, just unmute yourself.
Well, some of the reflections in the room were like seeing like a marked decrease in suffering just from following Dharma for a limited amount of time, and then it was also kicked around like the monastics take on, you know, a lot more rules, 200 some odd rules in the Vinaya. And one of the reflections was that with that level of ethical integrity of rules, it may possibly, it could be a possibility that the elimination of suffering could be more of a distinct possibility in that setting than in the householder setting. So that was just something that was kicked around.
Yeah. Great. I'll get kind of back to that in a second. I want to hear from Shannon.
Hi. So one of the things that always strikes me is how much sometimes I fear letting go of suffering. Because it was such a comfort zone to me for the majority of my life, that being without it sometimes seems terrifying. Am I a witness to my suffering? Am I a witness to other people's suffering? Of course I am. Do I still jump into it with both feet sometimes to stir it up and see what happens? Most definitely. I do think it's possible in time, but sometimes the idea of not having it is terrifying.
Like, who would I be if I wasn't attached to my suffering?
Mm-hmm.
Fuck yeah. I think that's a very, I appreciate you saying that. I think it's very applicable. I think a lot of people are, and relatable. I think a lot of people attach to our suffering as there's a sense of self invested in the suffering. Now, I want to just address what Mike said too, because this piece, and you know, I asked Ajahn Sumedho this one time, Longpo Sumedho, who is the kind of patriarchal, hierarchical kind of godfather of the Thai forest tradition, of which I have been trained in and spent a lot of time in monasteries and whatnot. And I asked him when I was in Thailand, there was several teachers I asked this to, several monks, and some lay teachers as well, because I was contemplating becoming a monk. And I was at this big event. It was a celebration of Ajahn Chah, and I was like, okay, should I do this? Should I just like jump in all the way? And I asked Ajahn Sumedho, is it possible to become fully liberated without taking on robes? And he basically kind of looked at me and said, like, Like, what do you think, man? I've been a fucking monk for, 40 years. Do you think I'd still be a monk if I thought there was another way? Right? That's kind of in a very polite way what he said to me. He said something like, look who you're asking. And I said, yeah, fair enough. But is it possible? And he said something like, extremely difficult. Extremely difficult to fully eradicate suffering as a layperson. It obviously didn't sway me. I didn't become a monk. A little bit because of what Shannon was saying. Like, I was a little bit like, well, I don't know, what would it be like if I didn't have my cravings and my desires? Pretty attached. Another monk that was not the patriarch. I asked him a similar question. He'd ordained later in life. He was from New Jersey. He was an ex principal of a school. And he said, he said, I think that we can, basically what's kind of what we're kind of talking about. I think that we can alleviate. He was kind of like saying, like, I don't think that I'm gonna reach enlightenment in this lifetime, but I believe that the effort that I'm putting forward will he basically was saying, like, there's this ripple effect, like his effort and his taking this on will alleviate as much suffering as he can in this life, and then will carry on into future lives. That it won't be, it's not like he will be liberated in future lives, but that the effort that he's putting forward, becoming a monk and living in that way. And so I feel like it's important to recognize what monastics, monks and nuns, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and there's a whole wing of Buddhism that doesn't get a lot of attention, gets a lot of attention here in the States, which are female monastics. And the importance of what they have. They're revered in Thailand and other countries because of the role that they hold. They hold the renunciation, the complete renunciation, which, what the Buddha is pointing to is necessary for complete liberation. That's kind of the bad news, right? So they're holding that as an ideal, like the Buddha does, like this Buddha image is an ideal, maybe not a reality. But and this is kind of where I fall into, and I think a lot of people fall into this idea of if I can alleviate, and I can't remember who it was, maybe it was Mike said it in the beginning, like, just like however long you've been meditating, understanding Buddhism, looking at precepts, practicing, has there been a reduction in your own suffering? Even if it was just the awareness that, oh, I can actually suffer less here. Noah says this thing that happens in his mind where he talks about part, and this is kind of like Mara, right? This part of the mind that goes, you should really suffer about this. You should just really choose to fucking suffer right now, right? And the ability to recognize that voice and then not take its advice. This is huge, I think, for us. Whether it's true or not true that as a non-monastic, liberation is possible. I mean, you have to think about someone like Ajahn Chah, okay? Ajahn Chah, who is the meditative master from northeast Thailand, pretty much uneducated, about 9 years old, became a monk, and then was formally educated in the monastic kind of Buddhist, school, right? And then, learned English, but then at some point he actually disrobed for a short period of time because he was like, I'm not really sure. He was 9, right? Then at like, 12, 13, something like that, he like disrobed, had a little, who knows what he did, maybe drank a beer or something, But very quickly he recognized there's no hope there. There's no future in that. And he went back and he reordained, and then was ordained as a monk for his whole life. The Dalai Lama, born into monasticism, right? What's that?
How does that happen? I thought it was really silly.
Well, no, they actually in Tibetan Buddhism, they're not. But no, what I mean by that is that he was preordained at his birth, right? Or when he was very young. I was maybe not for his whole life, but when he was very young, he was selected as this is a reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama, right? The Buddha of compassion, which is, a Tibetan thing. They have a little bit of a different way of viewing it, but basically that's the idea. this person is special, and we need to bring them in and then train them. And so trained from, I don't even know how old he was, maybe 6 or something like that. He was really young. Yeah.
What is it things that it cause of questioning the monkhood or whatever, is that like they also can find their own Mara, so like when they become monks,
Mm-hmm.
I've heard of times that you have like temples and
Oh, for sure.
so it's like
Yeah, yeah.
is brought along with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then just I wonder about someone like, have you read about Deepa Ma?
Yeah, Deepa Ma,
Yeah.
sure.
And I mean, she became highly enlightened.
Absolutely.
Like where she was like levitating.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that too, that she could read mind. Deepa Ma, an Indian sage, right? Trauma,
Yeah.
Tragic. Yeah, the story of Deepa Ma is amazing. And yeah, Deepa Ma is an Indian sage woman. There's another woman who I think her name is Amma, right? And she's been kind of, taken on this kind of matriarchal position. I thank you for bringing that up about Deepa Ma, actually, because it is really important to recognize that. No, I don't know. I mean, I have talked with she was, alive before my time. Talked with teachers who have studied with her, right? Joseph Goldstein being one, and talked about the deep wisdom that this woman held and the practice, and that there were definitely some levels of awakening, enlightenment, complete eradication of suffering. I don't know. Is the Dalai Lama completely liberated from suffering? I don't know. What's that?
He says no.
He says no. Right. Which is the right answer. Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know, man. He was pretty fucking bright, Even, yeah, I don't know. Ajahn Chah never admitted to being fully liberated from suffering. There are some Burmese monastics that have talked about being fully liberated from suffering. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of annoying because like, didn't you say it could take like 7 years to become fully enlightened? All these people are doing it their whole lives. And so it's just kind of like
7 years. No, what the Buddha said is it took him 7 years from the time that he decided in his early 20s to actually I think it was his late 20s, early 30s, to set out. And then it took him 7 years from the when he made that decision to becoming, his final liberation from suffering, right? And then taught for 45 years after that, maintaining liberation. So, yeah.
He was saying that like anybody can do it in 7 days.
He there is a teaching where he basically kind of breaks it down to like, and he starts with 7 years, and then he's like 7 years you can do it, and then he's like 5 years you can do it, and he's like 3 years you can do it, and then he's like, right now you can wake the fuck up, basically. So that is not it's guaranteed in 7 years, but more like seize the moment. So we're gonna have to end here, but this is such a deep, conversation, and we'll pick it up. We'll pick it up again. I didn't even get to my notes. But I want to just read this one thing. It's like it's called Crossing the Stream. It's a teaching from the Buddha, from the Dhammapada. Crossing the stream. Few cross over the river. Most are stranded on this side. On the riverbank, they run up and down, but the wise person following the way crosses over beyond the reach of death. Free from desire, free from possessions, free from attachment and appetite. I would say appetite could also mean passion. Following the 7 lights of awakening and rejoicing greatly in one's freedom in this world, the wise person becomes oneself a light, pure, shining, and free. Crossing the stream. So we'll end there. Mike doesn't know this yet, but Mike, you're up for next Wednesday. You can teach. Okay, I figured. Thank you, sir. I'll talk to you more about it. So yeah, online will be happening next week. I'm going to be on retreat from Sunday to Sunday. So we'll see you guys in 2 weeks, 2 Wednesdays. Next Wednesday in person, there'll be Brian's going to be leading a meditation and discussion, and Mike will be leading meditation discussion for those of you online. So please show up and support yourself in your own practice. All right. And may any goodness that has come from our time together, may this goodness be dedicated to the freedom from suffering for all beings. May all be free.